But number two today, we're called to show compassion through provision for the poor. The first day we see this in Deuteronomy is providing food for the hungry. If you look at chapter 23, verses 24 and 25, it says, "If you go into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes, as many as you wish, but you shall not put any in your bag. If you go into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the ears with your hand, but you shall not put a sickle to your neighbor's standing grain." Then in chapter 24, verses 19 through 22, "When you reap your harvest in your field and forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back to it. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over them again. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not strip it afterward. It shall be for the sojourner, the fatherless, and the widow. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this." In these passages, it is commanded that food is intentionally left in the fields and in the trees for the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the sojourner. Farmers are told intentionally not to harvest every bit of their crops. And those who were hungry could take what they could eat or take what they could hold. The idea was this: if there were crops in the land, then no one should go hungry. This applied, as we see in these passages, both to Israelites and to sojourners, to the non-Israelites. What does this look like potentially for us today? It could look like a couple of different things. Could look like maybe we go home this week, we clean out our cabinets or our pantry, and take food that's still good but has been sitting unused to our local food pantries, that those who are hungry may have something to eat. In a more relational sense, it may look like when you know someone has lost their job and money is tight, that you offer to bring dinner or provide groceries. Why would we do this? It reflects who our God is. God describes himself to his people as the bread of life. For the spiritually hungry, God through Christ is our daily sustaining bread. How much then should we want to show just a small glimpse of that sustaining bread of life through providing for a physical need like food? Because what God calls us to do towards others, he does first and best. Secondly, in making provision for the poor, we're supposed to provide dignity to the indebted. Chapter 24, verses 10 through 13 says, "When you make your neighbor a loan of any sort, you shall not go into his house to collect his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you make the loan shall bring the pledge out to you. If he's a poor man, you shall not sleep in his pledge. You shall restore to him the pledge as the sun sets, that he may sleep in his cloak and bless you, and it shall be righteousness for you before the Lord your God." And then in chapter 24, verse 6, it says, "No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in pledge." In this time when people borrowed money or goods, often a pledge was given as collateral to ensure that repayment would be made. This collateral could be something like a tool, a garment, a household item. But these texts give us two commands regarding these kinds of situations. First, the law didn't allow barging into the borrower's home to collect the pledge. Even in debt, the borrower's dignity was to be protected. The lender was to wait outside, respecting the borrower's privacy. What's that look like for us? Maybe in your business or another lane of your life, someone owes money to you. There's regular payments that are owed, and they're behind on those payments. As God's people, we can show compassion by we do not go talking about this to others, trashing them on social media. We go to them privately to seek a resolution, but not to increase shame upon them. The second commandment here is referenced from two different examples. One forbids taking someone's cloak as a pledge. Now, a cloak wasn't just a piece of clothing like we might have a jacket or a shirt. This doubled as a blanket, a shelter. It was an essential daily item. And for the poor, losing this overnight could mean extensive suffering or even death from the cold. The law forbid taking someone's cloak overnight as a pledge. The second example in chapter 24 that the Israelites are instructed in is not to take any part of a mill as a pledge. That mill is how that family would either produce their own food or make their living, and therefore taking that as a pledge was absolutely forbidden. Now, what does this look like? What would this predatory type of lending look like potentially in our day and time? Could look like payday lenders charging excessive interest, knowing the borrower will likely default, then seizing their only vehicle which they use to get to work. Even if this is legal, it is not the compassion that God calls us to show as his people. We are called to show compassion as God has been compassionate towards us. Christian, we owed God a debt that could never be paid. We had brought shame on ourselves because of what we owed in our sin. Yet God sent us Christ not to increase our shame, but that he would remove both our shame and our debt. What God calls us to do towards others, he does first and best himself. Lastly, in this category of provision for the poor, we see that we should provide timely wages. In chapter 24, verses 14 through 15, it reads, "You shall not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether he's one of your brothers or one of the sojourners who are in your land within your towns. You shall give him his wage on the same day, before the sun sets, for he's poor and he counts on it, lest he cry against you to the Lord and you be guilty of sin." The workers described here are described as both poor and working. They're people that depend on pay at the end of the day to buy their food, to sustain their life. We might say they're living paycheck to paycheck. The text here says that paying them in a fair and timely way was a protection to be given not just to the Israelites, but to anyone they employed. To not pay them is described as oppression and sin before the Lord. In our context, maybe it looks like this. Maybe you run a small business, and one of your employees is part-time, or you know they're living paycheck to paycheck. You resist the temptation to delay payroll or use funds for other priorities. You, child of God, in your compassion, you make their wage a top priority, even if it means trimming your own expenses or delaying a project. God is compassionate towards us in this way. He's compassionate towards his people through always coming through on every commitment and promise that he has made. God has never failed to deliver what he has promised to deliver to us. And in just a small way, in providing timely wages for those that depend on it, we are a reflection of our God who always comes through on his promises. I want to make one quick note before we move to the last point today. Nowhere in any of these texts are the poor called lawbreakers. We've seen what to do if someone breaks a law. Deuteronomy has made that very clear. But nowhere here are the poor called lawbreakers. Nowhere in these texts are they called lazy. Nowhere in these texts is it said to evaluate why they are poor before you show compassion and obey these commands. It simply says, make provision for the poor by showing the same compassion towards them that your God has shown towards you.